used to believe nothing I did mattered, not in a bitter way, in a settled way, the way a man believes the sun will come up. I ran a stall in the low market of Corail Landing for 11 years, selling patched coil fittings and second-hand tools to whoever had the coin. And I had watched enough of the port's traffic, ships up, ships down, fortunes made and lost on a bad wind or a good one, to know that the world ran on chance and nothing else. You could work honest your whole life and still end up spaced by a coupling you tightened yourself. You could do nothing at all and end up rich. I didn't resent it. I just stopped expecting anything different, and a man who expects nothing is rarely disappointed. That was the morning I found the child under my cart. Dawn market opens early on Corail, before the heat off the flats makes the stalls unbearable, and I was down on one knee latching my crate straps when I saw the eyes. Gray-green skin, gone ashen with cold. Ears thin as parchment, near translucent at the edges, trembling with every breath. Small enough that she'd folded herself into the gap between my crate and the wheel, and made herself smaller still when she saw me looking. I didn't reach for her. I've handled enough spooked things, cargo lizards, portside strays, men 3 drinks past sense, to know that a hand coming at you fast reads the same in any language. I set a heel of bread on the ground between us and went back to my straps, like she wasn't there at all. It took her the better part of an hour to take it. I let her. By mid-morning, I understood why she'd gone to ground. A tallyman came through the row, ledger slate in hand, chalking a small mark on my post the way he chalked every post. A routine census, he called it, of unclaimed minors on the manifest. Corail's charter let the Tally franchise collect any unclaimed child inside 30 days of a confirmed sighting, sort them by aptitude, and ship them to whatever contract had bid highest that quarter. Nobody called it what it was. They called it processing. They called it care. He didn't see her. She'd gone still as a stone under the cart, and I stood in front of the gap without ever deciding to. The way you catch a falling tool before you've thought about catching it. I told myself, walking home that night with her wrapped in a tool tarp and riding my hip like she weighed nothing, that I was only keeping something safe until the odds sorted themselves out. That's how I thought back then. Not I will protect this child. Just, the dice haven't landed yet. She didn't speak port tongue, or wouldn't. I never learned which. But she watched everything. My hands, my face, the way I latched a door, with an attention that felt less like fear and more like arithmetic. Like she was calculating what kind of man I was, from the smallest evidence available. On the second night, she took the copper token off my workbench, the worn one I kept for settling wagers with old Dessa 2 stalls down, and turned it over and over between 2 fingers before she looked up at me, asking without words whether it was allowed. "Keep it," I said. "Bad luck token anyway." Never once landed the way I called it. She kept it. She didn't let go of it again. I want to say I made some grand decision in those first days. Some vow spoken aloud to the dark. I didn't. I fed her because feeding a hungry thing in front of you is not a decision, it's a reflex. The same reflex that makes you catch the tool. I let her sleep behind the stove because the alternative was letting her freeze, and I had never in my life been able to let something freeze in front of me and call myself a man afterward. Small things. Practical things. If you'd asked me on any single one of those days whether I was doing something that mattered, I'd have told you no. I was only doing the thing in front of me. She learned my tools before she learned my language. By the second week, she could hand me a torque driver before I'd finished asking for it. Could sort fittings by thread pitch faster than I could, small fingers quick and sure, in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with wanting to be useful to someone who'd fed her. I noticed that, and said nothing about it, because I'd learned by then that naming a thing too soon could scare it off. I noticed too that Dessa 2 stalls down had started leaving an extra ration on my counter some mornings without a word, and that old Corbin who ran the dockside chandlery had taken to walking past slower, watching, saying nothing either. The whole row keeping a kind of silence around what I was doing, the particular silence of people who have decided not to ask questions they might have to answer for later. I understood that silence. It was the only cover any of us had. It was 3 weeks before the tallyman came back with the writ. Ledger error, he called it. A stray cited and chalked, never collected, now overdue against his quota and drawing interest the franchise wanted paid in kind. He had 2 enforcers with him this time, and a legal cite, and the particular flat patience of a man who has done this 100 times and expects to do it 100 more, because the numbers always favor the house eventually. He stood in the middle of the row, in front of every stall-keeper on the block, and read the writ like it was already finished. I could have handed her over quiet, taken the loss to the back room, let it be one more thing the world did to me while I stood by, and called it chance. That was the whole shape of how I'd lived. It would have cost me nothing but her. Instead, I stepped between the writ and the door and said, loud enough for the whole row to hear, that the child under discussion had a name and a guardian of record, and that if the franchise wanted to collect her, they'd do it in front of witnesses and a magistrate, not in a back room on a ledger technicality nobody in this market had ever seen verified. It wasn't bravery. I want to be honest about that, because the story gets told wrong if I let it sound brave. It was stubbornness. It was the plain, mulish refusal of a man who had finally found one thing in 30 years of watching the dice fall wrong, that he was not willing to let fall wrong too. The tallyman had numbers. I had a row full of neighbors who had watched me feed a stray child bread for 3 weeks, and who, one by one, stepped up beside me and said they'd witness whatever the magistrate needed witnessing. The franchise doesn't like witnesses. Witnesses slow the quota down, and quota is the only thing a franchise actually loves. The tallyman logged a formal contest, muttered something about revisiting the manifest, and left without her. I don't know if it was law that turned him or arithmetic, whether keeping her cost more in delay than she was worth in the ledger. I've never let myself care which. He didn't come back, and that was the whole of the miracle I needed. I raised her the way you raise anything you didn't plan on, and can't imagine your life without afterward. Badly in the specifics, faithfully in the general. She grew fast, the way her people do, and she kept the coin. Wore it on a cord round her neck until the cord wore through, then a new one. I never asked her why. I think I knew. She left Corral at 17, on a survey contract bound out system, and I stood at the same dawn market and told myself the odds were what they were, and a man shouldn't expect a letter every cycle just because he wanted one. Chance again. Old habits. She came back 6 years later. I didn't know her at first. Taller than the doorway, in a coat that cost more than my whole stall, until she turned the collar down and I saw the ears, and then she opened her hand and there was the token, worn smooth on both faces now. No calling it at all anymore. No chance left in it whatsoever. She didn't say much. Her people never did, not with me. She set the token on my counter, next to the crate straps I still hadn't replaced in 20 years. And she told me the survey outfit had a maintenance contract open. Good pay, permanent post. And she'd already put my name against it before she'd even walked in the door. Because a debt, she said, doesn't care what the dice say. It only cares who was standing there when it mattered. I took the contract, not because I needed the work, because I finally understood, watching her stand in my stall with that token in her palm, that I had spent 30 years calling the world a game of chance, and the one morning it mattered most, I had never once let it be one.